A very good morning to you and welcome to this dialogue with the winners in the 7th edition of the BBVA Foundation Frontiers of Knowledge Awards. We're here with researchers, artists and organisations that have made a difference to our understanding of the world. At the same time, they've opened up new perspectives in artistic creation or indeed helped improve the lives and raise the prospects of some of the world's most impoverished citizens. Now, in this dialogue, what we want to do is to examine how the work of these people has influenced the lives of the many. At the same time, we want to find out what they think about the culture and changes in the opening decades of the 21st century. But above all, what is it that motivates them? And what was it that teased their curiosity and eventually led them to embrace the professions for which today they have been rewarded? We're joined today by people whose contributions have improved all our lives and perhaps shaped the way that we view the world in which we live. It's often said that the main motivation behind research work, the starting point for many a great venture, isn't so much solving practical problems, but it's the pleasure of invention and discovery. But don't rule out the power of inspiration. It has shaped many a destiny. Leonard Kleinman, I want to put this first question to you. It is the tension between, on the one hand, the desire to satisfy intellectual curiosity and the pressure from society to find an answer to a big question, something which is beneficial to all of us. How do you resolve that tension?
Clearly, the pursuit of the curiosity, the searching the unknown, by far trumps the requirement that there be a particular application or end result. You don't want to anticipate where you're going. You're moving into uncharted territories when you do research. It's the Holy Grail. And as you know, most great discoveries are not accompanied by eureka, rather by, that's funny. Let's pursue that path. And where it leads, you follow. And when you're done, you find perhaps there's a broad set of applications instead of one that's prescribed ahead of time. So opening up a world, finding the underlying principles, discovering, if you will, the simplicity in a complex situation. That's the gratification. For me, that's the pursuit of research.
But again, a question to throw out to all of you in your respective fields. How do you resist that pressure from society when it wants an answer and it says, look, it's fine for you to have these intellectual flights of fancy, but we need a solution. We need to find the answer to a cancer, to an environmental issue, an issue of climate change, of economics. How do you resist these tensions from society?
I would say I don't think it's a tension. I think that because work is of interest to society, it makes it of a bit more interest to us. We see the relevance. But our answers aren't drawn out of the air. Our answers are the result of hard-focused experiments, theory, and so on, that you have to do. And when you do that work, you are pushing forward the frontier of knowledge. And at some point, you push it far enough forward that what you've learned will help solve problems. But I think if you were solely trying to push for a problem, you might miss the big discoveries that can address many, many problems.
Do you think that wider society perhaps recognises that and perhaps understands the fact that research doesn't wrap itself up in a couple of years? For some of you, your research has gone on for many years, some would say a lifetime.
Well, there's this huge communications problem, right? It's a challenge for us. So I'm holding my cell phone. It has a GPS. Einstein is in there, right? If you do not make a relativistic calculation in the GPS, it will dump you in the Atlantic in about a week. It will get lost. Einstein is in there. And yet Einstein, at the time, looked so completely useless. It was just knowledge for knowledge's sake that he was learning. And he's in there. And our challenge to communicate to people that what we do that does not immediately show application, that learning how to route packets is the internet. I'm sorry, this is a challenge that we need as a community to do a better job of communicating, that Bohr and Feynman and Einstein are in my hand. You know, and I'm not sure that there are people in the world will take this and send me a note that says, you scientists don't know what you're talking about. Okay, the irony is lost, but it's really important.
I could see you nodding your head vigorously there, Richard Blundell, when you heard this.
Yeah, I mean, in economics there's a huge tension here, and I guess what we learn is that regularly the worst economic policy is made when you don't have a kind of strong research base, and that's our line, and I think it's been proven that you build up a strong knowledge of the way parts of the economy work, and that happens over a long period of years with a lot of data, a lot of methods, new methods maybe, and occasionally then you're there to address a problem, and you can address it at the time it comes up. But it's very rare that someone without that foundation answers a problem in any way that's useful. And that's something you have to continuously convince the public and everyone that's the key. Even in economics, you need this kind of fundamental research foundation to really draw sensible conclusions.
Yeah, and it's an interesting point as well, because people would say, well, we can understand the relevance of research to science, particularly those such as yourself, Steve, who are looking at basic sciences, or indeed you three. You've made your names in the field of cancer research, but they're less generous, perhaps, shall we say, to the economists, because they're saying, well, hang on a minute, you're not dealing with tangibles, you're dealing with numbers, etc. So, what they do is perhaps more relevant than what you guys do. Professionally offensive, I know, but...
No. Yes, often we like to think of ourselves as a science, but, understanding economic behavior is a pretty complicated thing, and I wouldn't suggest that we really fully understand it. It's continuously challenging, but nonetheless, if you want to say anything sensible, you just have to spend a lot of time over many years, I think, building a kind of foundation, much like you would find in a lab science, in fact. The similarities are stronger. I think probably Dave would agree that you need something close now to a laboratory in economics to get things right.
So I would say one thing that the public probably doesn't understand is that when we're following our nose on what we're interested in, there's a large element of luck. Then you intersect with something that happens to be important in solving a problem, and then depending on what your interests are, you say, well, I kind of like that applied thing, and you move over in that direction, or I'm not so interested in that, and there are other people who will take that part up, and that's how it all works. And, completely, if it's like, let's solve this very tiny focused problem, then the best that's going to happen is you're going to solve this tiny focused problem, and there isn't much progress.
I think a challenge to all of us is we live in a world of immediate gratification. So in our work, which is international development and combating malnutrition, it takes years to have results, but we're all reliant on donors to fund our research, to fund our work, and they want to see that it works, and they want to know it now. They want to know in 10 to 12 months. And all of our work, I think, takes years, including composing. You don't do it in 1 month and say, okay, here it is.
It's a lifetime commitment. But do you also find, and I'm referring this question specifically to you, Tony, you, Joseph, and you, Charles, that because you have made developments in your particular field, there are those who would say, great, now you can move on to the next stage. We want the cure for cancer.
Well, look, I would like to echo the idea that we are really basically following our curiosity. I think that's the key driving force. It's difficult to do anything significant if you don't follow your curiosity. And you just want to move forward without really knowing where you go. But in the areas that we are associated, we have some serious problem. For all of us, evolution is taken for granted. And if you look in the world societies, most societies large percentage of people do not believe in evolution. Even in countries such as USA, like half of the US, the South is sort of very much reluctant of understanding evolution or even following it. So how can you create development when the great portion of the society even do not believe in the fundamentals of what we are trying to do? And I think this is a challenge, and it has to do with deficiencies in basic education and the interface of effect on religion, on science, and mixing them up and confusing them.
But it comes back to the point that you made as well, this desire for instant gratification. You held up your mobile telephone. The mobile telephone has revolutionized our lives. It feeds that instant gratification.
Not only in a positive way.
Not always in a positive way.
Not only in a positive way.
Absolutely.
Would you like to defend the technological case?
I don't have to. It speaks for itself, but I think it's driven, by, as we all say, by the pursuit of curiosity and the unknown.
Yeah.
But there's a kind of common theme here. As engineers, we used to believe that the systems we built, we understood how they operated. We built them. Whereas the natural sciences, poor folks, they were given a system and have to spend their lives figuring it out.
Yes.
And the economists have a system that's totally unclear. But the fact is, all of our systems now have gotten so complex, the arrogance of thinking we understand them should be thrown away. We all are faced with enormous complexity, and the pursuit of understanding bits and pieces to simplify that complexity, I think, is a common pursuit among all of us. And that does not go along with the idea, focus on that. No, look at the big picture. You won't see it there. You've got to look at the big picture to get the essence of it all and the simplicity of what's common.
Because this is part of the problem, isn't it? Because you've made a reference there to timelines. Well, that's one of the themes that I've picked up. And certainly from your perspective, Kathy, as somebody who's working with the impoverished of the world, tackling hunger, trying to change the way that people farm to feed themselves, it's rather artificial to say to somebody, look, you've got 5 years to turn this around to feed your community. Here's the technology to do it. It's not going to work.
Well, particularly because you don't want charity. You don't want people to be dependent on you giving them food. You want a sustainable solution. So you want to have something that when you go away is going to last. So if you're helping someone build a farm, if you're helping someone learn how to feed themselves, it's that old Chinese proverb, give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day, or a woman. Teach a woman to fish and she'll eat for a lifetime. You want it to be sustainable, but that takes more time.
But there is an overlap in what you do. And yet the interesting thing is that you've been put into separate categories for your achievements. But just looking at your work, what you're trying to do, you should be together in many ways, but you operate separately, almost as islands.
I would even, there's an element of surprise that is difficult to even determine. I have never thought that I will make contribution to cancer research. I never was interested or pursuing work in cancer research. This may surprise most of you. I was trying to understand how molecule interacts, what happened when they change, and I was following, and I choose a particular set of molecules that turn out to be molecules which are interesting for normal development and for cancer. And when Tony made the discovery, it was clear that we are linked. And then Charles took advantage of all that in developing different... So you see, neither of us was aiming toward having a meeting together and definitely not receiving a prize together. It was just some random events which met together in a complicated way. This is how science goes.
The luck factor, because you used that word before.
Luck, or I don't know what to describe.
Well, there is always luck in research,
yes.
I think. However good your plan is, your hypothesis is, you can never, and certainly in biology, predict the outcome with precision.
We cannot predict it. This was not our goal, my goal.
But I would say that these guys could have won the basic. I mean,
Yes.
it could have been a basic science award. There's no difference, right? I mean, it's
Some
clearly
scored by biology.
very, except that there's this other category, so that's how it fits in. But let me just say one thing that I think follows up on what was said earlier. I think part of the problem is that there's a subset of people in academia and other places who kind of like to pretend that they plan out everything in advance and it all works exactly how they did that. And first of all, mostly it's not true. It's probably never true, almost. And secondly, if it worked that way, it would be incredibly boring, right? It's the exciting thing is when you're trying to do kind of this, and then all of a sudden you get this, and that's just and then being able to connect it. That's where it really, does something for you, and then you go completely change what you're doing.
Yeah.
So I can see the connections in what you guys are doing, and it comes back to the point that I made before. There are connections with what you do as well, but somehow or other it's been separated. Perhaps it's because of the way that we view it.
I'd say not in our world. We're very intentionally non-siloed. Climate change has everything to do.
There's a connection, certainly.
You've got climate change affects vectors of disease, affects mosquitoes, affects malaria, affects lymphatic filariasis, and on and on. And economics, we bring in economists all the time to study the ROI on our programs. So we are firmly scientifically based. So there is a lot more synergy among this group. When I first came here, I thought, gee, what do I have to do with everybody else in the room? But it's really clear that it's all interrelated, just like you say.
If I could jump in, I'm very interested in helping the world find a way to feed 11 billion people and still have an earth left worth living on. And it's very relevant for what you're trying to do, because one of the biggest issues we have is that the poorer people of the world, besides lacking resources for food, to buy food and for medicine and so on, they don't have the capital, the money to be able to farm the land effectively, which means a lot more land gets cleared, 3 or 4 or 5 times more gets cleared of native vegetation to be able to grow the food. And if they were able to be taught how to and found a way to reinforce their increased yields, the same piece of land could give them 4 or 5 times more food. And that means 4 or 5 times less land has to be cleared. Clearing land releases greenhouse gases, it causes extinction of animals. These are really all very tightly linked. We need development economics to go along with good nutrition and modern agriculture to solve these big global problems.
But I'd also like to bring in the creative side, and this is music, because Yuka Kertek, you've been honoured for your work in contemporary music, but do you feel somehow that amongst scientists and those who work in the field of attempting to feed the impoverished, that somewhere along the line the creative arts is excluded from the picture?
Well, as they say, man does not live by bread alone.
Bread
And
alone.
if I look at our work, it's a lot about changing behaviors of people on the ground, how they grow food, what they eat. And the way that's communicated in the countries we work in Africa, through music. It is through song and dance. So
to bind communities
there's a total
together.
link.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's what people listen to. The music is what resonates, and then they can hear messages. So music is fundamental to development work, for sure.
Richard Ali.
We sat there last night and listened to your composition, and it was glorious. And, somewhere what we love of discovery is not what motivates everyone. And the arts, the music, the literature do. And we're sitting in this beautiful room that very clearly has artwork that motivated people. And we have to, the unity of all of this is fantastic, going from the fundamental discoveries to the applications, to saving people's lives, to helping them, and then on to enjoying what we do. And we as a community have to speak for that unity.
Right, so an environment can inspire.
Yes. You probably remember Hardy, the mathematician. And Hardy, the mathematician, when he was getting up in years, he wrote a piece on the beauty of mathematics. And then he pointed out how it was beautiful, but what he did was not useful. All right? And what he did has gone into computer security. And it is useful all the time. And, so you wrap around from beauty to knowledge to applications that help us to enjoy beauty.
Right, but it's really, I suppose, picking up on the point that was made about education, encouraging people to see that connection rather than viewing things in isolation, because this moves on to the next point that I want to raise, and this is the relationships that some of you have had with policymakers. Now, in particular, economists. How would you describe your relationships with policymakers? Dare I use it, the other P word, politicians, because we are very cynical about our politicians, and there is a feeling that some of them perhaps would like your economic theories to fit in with a particular agenda. And how do you battle against that? What pressures does that impose on you?
You're getting lots of knowing smiles here.
Yes, I'm obviously treading on very familiar territory here.
It's very familiar territory.
Go ahead.
No, Dave, you've done it.
Shall I make the decision for you?
No.
Yeah. Well, one thing that's maybe a little different about economics than science, I have great appreciation for my colleagues, and they're very articulate, actually, so I congratulate them for that. But many times the questions that we ask, 75% of the people think they already know the answer. In fact, most people think, especially politicians and their policymakers, think that they know already how everything works, and they have an agenda, and oftentimes they interpret. We're sort of brought in as part of an argument, and one time somebody will like your results because they fit their agenda. Another time they will fight you, and so our input to the political process, at least in the United States, is very hit and miss. And once in a while, somebody can make a contribution. Very inadvertently, they would have done something a long time ago. Basically, the kind of process you're describing, it would have written something or found some relationship that turns out to matter a little bit at some particular point. Somebody's designing a policy, and maybe they will follow. In designing it, they'll try and build a little bit on that.
Maybe.
But most of the time, I think, unfortunately, it's very minimal.
I mean, I like that expression, hit and miss. Would you say that that's your experience, Richard, of working with British politicians who think they know everything about economics?
Of course, it's exactly the same point. I mean, the political cycle is too short often to fit with any scientific investigation. One thing you spend a lot of time doing is making sure really bad things don't happen. I mean, a lot of bad things happen in the economy, but perhaps you shield a few of them. And it's often just pointing out mistakes that could be made is a lot of the work one does in policy. You just know. I think the other point is that it's true that you are asked to react quite quickly, and what you learn is that you need a lot of background and different kinds of people to be able to react quickly, and it's convincing policy people that that's what they need. And of course, they're surrounded by advisors who agree with them. And our job, in some sense, is to put some uncertainty and rigor into that.
Do you feel you ever succeed in that? Have you ever come close to succeeding?
You have to be pretty optimistic in this business, I think. I actually think we have succeeded in some occasions. But things also change rapidly, so there are challenges arising all the time, and I wouldn't say it's always a fantastic success. I'm bringing different types of people in, as we were talking before. Having people who understand. For example, if you're trying to advise people on how work will look among older people, a big issue. You have to. There'll be people who think that it's all health. There'll be people who think it's all retirement pension incentives. Sure. And it's really bringing all those different things together and trying to figure out how to apportion among them.
What is a priority and what isn't?
Science in a way of it. And it draws on different disciplines, of course.
But is that the hit and miss wall, so to speak? Is that something that you're also familiar with? Because in your disciplines, I'm sure that you do have to deal with policymakers. There could be individuals who head up various departments. They have the money. They could make a difference to a line of research which is beneficial. It's arguing the case. Is this something you've had to deal with?
I serve in the U.S. on the National Cancer Advisory Board, so I'm involved in, which is a panel that's it's a panel that's appointed by the president actually to oversee the budget of the National Cancer Institute, and so it depends on economic times as to what that budget is, but I think there's several examples in biomedicine over the last 10 to 20 years where technology opportunities such as DNA sequencing enabled very bold big science projects that could really move the needle in terms of application down the line.
So it's the way you sell it, basically, that if you can actually convince the paymasters, look, this is really good because if we get this, if you give us the funding, we get the breakthrough. It means that we have achieved this milestone with medicine, and at the same time we're tapping into that brain power, these young up-and-coming scientists who can be involved in this.
Yeah, I think it's not so hard to sell the idea. The real challenge is selling additional funding to support the idea versus, well, just carve it out of your existing budget, which is the usual situation.
It makes me think of a case in point, which is Ebola. Ebola didn't matter in the United States because it happened over there in Africa. And the minute Ian Crozier and a few other docs came back to the United States with Ebola, all of a sudden the R&D stepped up. Yeah.
But it came out of an existing budget, right? So.
Yes. Well, I think it's pretty easy to sell. I mean, they have all these economic evaluations that I've seen that the return on investment for, research in biomedical areas is tremendous in terms of starting all these new companies and everything else. And it's just a question of whether you have a very short-term view of the world or a longer-term view of the world. And unfortunately, right now, everything is very short-term.
Sure.
It gets back to this cell phone mentality.
Yes, but the return on investment, not just for biomedicine, but
for
across
all
the
research,
research
yes,
fields.
absolutely.
The scholarship on this is very clear that the return on investment is very high.
And David, your response to this?
Yeah, in my area, I'm always trying to find ways to solve environmental problems which have minimal economic cost or maybe actually pay for themselves. And there have been some successes, but lots of failures. And one of the biggest ones in the United States are biofuels made from corn. We take a food crop that's important for people around the world. We use 40% of it to make a biofuel, ethanol. And if you look at the full life cycle of ethanol, it's worse for the atmosphere, worse for greenhouse gases than gasoline. So we have something that is highly subsidized, which gives a profit to a certain sector of the economy that is ludicrously bad. And I was invited to speak to House and Senate committees. I met with chairs of the relevant committees. I was on a White House advisory group. Everyone there had the knowledge, but politics is more about money than the environment and more about money than science. Right? So that was my biggest disappointment.
Sure, but I suppose the worry is that when you apply money in that way to that part of that section of the arts, it also discourages the talent that we should be nurturing. Is that something which worries you? Because you are consumers of art when you're not constructing things in laboratories, when you're not analysing human behaviour. You like to unwind, you like to read the latest books, you like to hear the latest concerts, and the fear that that could be somehow undermined by costings.
Right. Well, so we're always fighting in the U.S., probably worldwide, about whether, we could do it the cheapest way possible. I mean, you could have built this room without the beautiful floor, without all everything that makes it aesthetically so pleasing for a lot less money. And people would say, well, why don't we do everything in the most functional way that we can and the most sort of austere way that we can, because it has the same function, but, it contributes so much to the joy of living. It depends on how you value different things, and that is...
It's a slightly unfair question that I'm going to throw out here, so anybody who wants to go for it, please respond. But can you ever have an interaction, a satisfying level of interaction between yourselves and policymakers, bearing in mind that you're approaching something from one direction, they're coming in at another, and for many of them it does boil down to cost. Great idea, but it costs too much.
I have to say, in our work, we have positive interactions all the time, whether it's influencing policy in West Africa, which we have, so it is now mandatory that people who manufacture cooking oil add vitamin A to it. It's mandatory that millers who make flour add iron to the flour. Very positive interactions.
But the argument there is that, of course, they're going to be very positive because they benefit if you have a healthy labour force.
But it's a cost to them. The cost of adding those micronutrients to the products is their cost.
But a short-term cost for long-term gain.
Right, but isn't that what we all say to policymakers? It's a short-term cost for a long-term phenomenal gain.
But that's the problem, because they don't always see it. I mean, we've heard there from Richard and David that you can present them with the facts. This is how not to do it, because the following outcomes would occur. But still, sadly, some of them don't listen.
I think climate change is the biggest case of people not listening.
The discussion is often very different depending on whether there's a camera watching it or not. And if you have the chance to talk to many policymakers when there's not a camera watching, they're interested in solutions, they want to know what is new, and they know the basics. And they know the basics of my field, and they know the basics of your field, and they know the basics of your field. And then sometimes, when the camera turns on, the story changes. And this comes back to the communications issue, because they're looking for help from the voters so that they can use the knowledge which they already have.
If I could comment, in the United States, one of the first parts of the process of being nominated to be president is to go to Iowa. And Iowa grows corn, and Iowa has lots of people who make a lot of profit from ethanol, and many members of the House or Senate who voted against those bills that allowed ethanol to become a biofuel, because they knew it was not good for the environment and so on, completely change their story when they come to Iowa. And if you know both sides of it, it's really rather interesting. I've not seen anyone stand up and say what they really believe about ethanol once they go to Iowa.
Oh dear.
Well, and even worse, you'll have the same person talking about what we call pork, which is just kind of wasteful or set aside things. And then if you ask them about, well, what about corn and ethanol from corn, they'll immediately, well, that's, they'll go into some completely specious argument about why that's different in terms of things.
Right, so in terms of actually having that ideal relationship, it's a goal to aim for, but it's not going to happen overnight. But
I would say that the one issue, obviously, is that the political cycle is so much shorter than the research cycle. So basic research can take years. We've just been hearing from several people, much longer than the cycle of a politician. I mean, even if a politician's re-elected, and often getting re-elected perverts the sort of things they're going to say.
There's no guarantee of continuity.
Right, there's no guarantee of continuity, and that, I think, from our perspective in the US, you need to educate the politicians about the long-term nature of science, that it needs consistent funding, that means that it may go beyond the end of their term as a politician.
Right, so
I think it also comes to Yossi's point about educating the public, because we can vote these bozos out of office if they don't listen to us, but no one's willing to do that because they're not informed.
We are discussing influencing a democratic system, but let's not forget that most of the population of the world is not even run by governments, which democracies. So it's really irrelevant, for many, and among the biggest.
So another division within the world to navigate, basically.
Yeah.
Okay, Kathy, what inspired you?
I'll go back as far as last week. I was in Senegal last week, and I met a woman named Ami Fall, who's 35 years old, had 5 children, aged 1 to 14. Her husband works in a slaughterhouse. He's a day laborer, doesn't make enough money to support the family. They don't own a home. They have a short-term rental. And we started a program with them where we helped them plant gardens with very healthy fruits and vegetables, and provided them with a rooster and 3 laying hens. And that was 3 months ago. And since then, Ami says that her children have grown taller. They've put on weight, and in the last 3 months, not one of her 5 children have gotten sick. So that's all the inspiration I need.
But your career in development, it goes back a long way. So if you had to trace that one trigger, the thing which perhaps made it inevitable that this would be the career that you would follow, what was it?
I started out as a dancer and lived in New York City during the beginning of what turned out to be the AIDS epidemic. And I would say that was the turning point for me, to see all of my colleagues fall very ill, be stigmatized for their illness, and then to have many of them die made me feel like I had a life to live where I was going to be making a difference and stopping people suffering when they didn't need to.
And it was a sense of helplessness, perhaps, that you could help them as friends, but it was taking the battle beyond that.
It was figuring out a structured way to have larger impact, and something I think that's relevant for all of us is to taking an idea and being able to take it to scale, to go broader and have it impact more people.
How important is friendship networks, for example, in inspiring what you do? Or perhaps it could be a criticism, a desire to actually prove somebody wrong. Is that important at all as an inspirational force?
I think critical teachers are key. I decided that I want to be a scientist very early because I had good physics and math and chemistry teachers. Certainly, this is what motivated me.
And in your case, Steve?
Well, two things. One, I had in high school, I had a great chemistry teacher, and also the U.S. National Science Foundation had programs at a lot of universities where high school students could go and get some research experience, and I saw the excitement and also the social aspects of all of that, and I thought, okay, this is great, I want to do this.
Okay, and in your case, Maestro Yogi Kurtok, what inspired you?
What is inspiration? I call it earlier illumination. It's a moment where you understand the world. It's and all is clear where emotionally and rationally you are present for all the things around you. You know, first I am inspired by the language. It's simply. I am born in a region of Romania that was Austro-Hungary before, and it's a region trilingual. It's Hungarian, Romanian, and German. But then the French was very early present. I failed always to learn English. I learned and never get it. But I read mainly Shakespeare and Joyce, and after Beckett. That was for me very, very important. And Romanian is so near to Italian that only with a little word book, I adventured with Divina Commedia. And that was an experience without knowing Italian really, but Italian is living for me, and naturally through the opera Monteverdi and Verdi and even Puccini, and then as I was 50, it was in the socialism obligatory to learn Russian. There all people, myself too, sabotated it. But with 50, I began to read, and 10 years I read only Russian. Then with 70, I began the Old Greek. and the Greek drama, it's something that's very, very important for me. That is, once this, each time that I learned the language, it was for me the wonder. What is a language? What is the structure? how people found it, and in the different languages, it's very passionating how they are able to express all the relationships simply with the grammatical forms. It's for me that's, but all languages that I learned Russian was inspiring me. It was a time that I wrote only Russian poetry. And in Greek, Heraclitus, I have a lot of sentences that I try to express. But now c'est l'extérieur des choses. What's for me important is in the poetry. Even I may tell that I call poet someone who is taking part on the suffering of the world or on his own suffering. It's Michelangelo. Io piango, io ardo, io mi consumo, il cuore di questo si nutrisce. Oh dolce sorte, chi è che viva sol della sua morte, come fo io d'affanni e di dolore. And that's for me very. Now I have a series of compositions called Yateko Games, and that was originally a pseudo-pedagogical series, but little to little it grew to science, games, and messages, and the personal messages were very important for me. I was even sometimes ashamed that the fact that people had to, les gens ont eu le deuil. But it was not only it was partaking on the joys of people, and mainly I considered myself like a people. That is I think that what's really happening and what's really painful, I don't know.
But it's the pain, of life.
I cannot tell it, but I have much too much condolence messages.
Sure.
But they are always portraying the person to whom I wrote it, and even the dead person.
I think the point is there are many sources of inspiration.
They are always, in a manner or on the other, concerned with it. But it's I cannot tell. Sometimes it's like. It's just a scale or a fragment of a scale that's inspiring.
Sure.
Sometimes I feel as it were a cluster of sounds, and then little to little I have to take off the not necessary from it. It's like Michelangelo said from the marble.
You find beauty in the marble.
Sculpture is already there. You must take off only what's not necessary.
Sure.
And then you have it before you. You know?
But this is, again, it shows that inspiration comes from many sources. And there is an assumption that you can only really be inspired when you're young. But as we learned from the maestro, some of his best inspirations happened in his middle years at the age of 50. It's an ongoing process. Would you agree with that?
Completely, totally and utterly, yes. You can't, I'm a natural scientist. You can't go out without looking at the beauty of the world and being inspired by it. And for its own sake, as well as for the good it does for us. The maestro's statements about the language, I thought, were so appropriate here. To get the beauty of that world useful to us, some of us have had to learn a very different language. And to see that this differential equation actually is that flowing glacier, and that we can learn how it works and learn something about it that is useful to people by translating it in these interesting ways.
But science does have a language of its own. I'm not a mathematician, but I've heard many mathematicians say that it has its own musicality, and that once you lock onto that, you can sense it. It's almost like a form of composition without the sound. Is that a fair enough assumption to make, or?
Not for how I'm not that good a mathematician, I guess. For me, that's not the case.
But you do like maths.
I love maths, yes. But what I would say is that the inspiration I find almost always comes when things I thought I understood don't work. I like to tell my students, when things fall apart, you're about to learn something. So all of us in science think we know what should happen when we're doing something, and then when something totally unexpected happens is when you know that you're about to learn a lot about that system. And so, whereas we just heard about someone on the artistic side where everything sort of came together and there was a sense of the ability to visualize the whole thing. At these moments, what you visualized was, my God, I've been wrong all these years. My whole discipline is wrong. We're thinking incorrectly.
But I suppose we're not programmed for failure. That's the point, because we're told that failure is a very good thing. Because as you said, you can learn. But how many of us can really take it and accept it? We see it as a personal drawback. We do. We don't like to fail. We're not programmed for that. We're programmed to succeed.
Well, there's two ways to deal with failure. One is to sit in the corner and cry, and the other is to take a lesson and what did it teach you or me, and let's move on. And hopefully you take the latter approach.
And what I was saying, I don't call it a failure when something doesn't work. I mean, to me, that is an inspiration, because it tells you that there is something very important that you don't know, that you have to learn. And in many cases, I will spend another 10 years of my life understanding what that is. But I know that where we thought we were as a science was wrong. And then you have to find out what isn't so wrong. What is the next best idea we can come up with?
Well, let's agree not to call it a failure. Let's call it a setback. What is the most profound setback that any of you have experienced?
I don't think that's right. I don't think it's a setback. I think that's not what I interpret David is saying. I'm just saying that my interpretation is you have a hypothesis, you have a preconceived notion of what the result will be based on everything you've done up until that point. The results are not in accord with that hypothesis. You say, I need to rethink this, and wow, you know, in the best world of times, it's like, this is much better than what I was trying to do. This actually shows that everybody has been wrong. That's not a setback. That's a step forward.
But there's still the disappointment that goes with that, surely.
No, I don't think that it's a disappointment. I mean,
Even
there
if
may
you
be a
spent 5
very
years,
short disappointment.
But even if you've invested 5 years exploring a hypothesis which proves not to be founded, you have to start again?
Well, but that's not how it works, I think. Go.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly exciting to realize that there is something that was not yet known, that you bumped into, that you cannot avoid. You don't understand why it's there, what it means, how broad, how important it might be in general. But it's really, it is exciting. It's sort of tingly feeling. You realize that, and it often doesn't come to you instantly. I mean, one of the big things in my career, I had a result, I didn't understand it. Well, I thought it must be caused by something else, so I ignored it for a while. But it kept coming back and coming back and coming back, and I couldn't ignore it.
But there are the cases.
For me, that's happiness.
Yeah.
To feel suddenly that I understand something that I never thought that it's possible.
There's another emotion, if you will. We're talking to sophisticated, mature scientists and musicians here. But think of the young person. In my case, I was 6 years old, and what drove me was to discover wonder, magic. I built a crystal radio set as a kid from a comic book, and I heard music with no power, no batteries, all free. I stole the earpiece from the candy store. The point is, what was this? So I had no preconceived notions as to what was going to happen, but it just took me over. And I said, I have to spend the rest of my life figuring out how this works. No preconceived, no failure, no expectation, just surprise. Wow.
So was that a eureka moment? I have to find out how this works, and out of that, discover how other things operate.
Yeah, it just was. It was a playpen of wonderful new things, that discovery. As we talked about earlier, the curiosity. Let's go find out what's going on here.
So you were inspired by building a crystal radio set with a stolen earpiece. What about you, David Card? What was your moment of inspiration?
Well, the reason why I became an economist, I was actually a science undergraduate, and I was helping my girlfriend with her economics because the math was getting her down. And it explained the simple economics doesn't work that well in many cases. The one place it really works well is agricultural markets. And my father was a farmer, and one thing that always puzzled me was why if it's a good year for the farms, it's actually a bad year. That when there's a crop surplus, that's actually a really bad thing. And you can have I had a lot of math, a lot of physics, a lot of chemistry, but no one had ever really explained that to me in a simple way that made any sense. And I thought, well, this is actually pretty important. So that's kind of why I got interested in economics. And I was not going to be such a good physicist, so this was.
So it actually turned out to be a good move
choice,
in the end.
Yeah. But I would emphasize something that in economics, as in all the sciences, the most important. There's thousands of things that people think they know, and that we've got some working model. Sometimes we've got something that it isn't completely understood, but we're kind of working with that, or whatever basic understanding we have of that. In economics, that's really primitive, and in the sciences, it's much more sophisticated, but there's always giant holes, and it's not, normally the working model isn't really correct. And the most important thing that a young person or an older person can do is find out that there's some problem there and have some vague idea of how to maybe modify or fix it. And that's sort of what I think my colleagues are trying to describe, is this idea that, then people get excited. If you say, okay, this is all screwed up, we think we understand this, and the more fundamental it is, the thing that you think you show is screwed up, that the more important it is, and the more exciting it is to actually, but you might actually have no idea how to fix it for a very long time, or maybe never.
But that's the beauty of it, because it is an ongoing thing, trying to find the big answer.
Well, it's not very exciting if everybody tells you everything, we know everything, that's kind of the opposite of science. That's, religion or something, to tell you the honest truth.
We'll still clear of that one, I think. That's a bit too big. But I mean, but again, you were nodding your head there, Richard. There's moments of intensity on your face as well.
No, I mean we're all in some sense empirically driven. We find things that challenge what we previously thought or what other people previously thought. I guess the first time I was also started as an engineer to begin with, and I guess the kind of illumination moment was figuring out that we may have a chance of understanding human economic behavior. And that was a big surprise that we might be able to do that. Of course, I was far too optimistic. We understand very little. But it is true that, you're continuously challenged by what you find. What's incredible is that, it's also a little bit of a miserable science because, there are things you would really like to do to help society and they look kind of obvious. And the problem with economics, it kind of gets in the way a lot of the time. And it's kind of discovering where it gets in the way, how you can figure that out is a kind of key issue. It's the kind of balance between what's kind of ideal in a sense, or what other people think are ideal, and what's kind of feasible and what will work empirically. And that's the kind of nature of what we do.
Another big question to throw out to you all. Can you be creative with technology, with science, and can technology stifle creativity? That stumped you all.
Well, I would say both, yes. The answer to both would be yes.
Yes.
Yeah, you can be creative,
well,
certainly.
I think.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Tom.
I was going to say in biology, technology almost makes it too easy to do experiments, and so people blindly use technology thinking they're going to get an answer, whereas they haven't thought about the problem. And so I think technology can blunt creativity often because people don't have to think. They'll just say, let's apply this technology and see what happens. So
and the answer will present itself.
Yes.
Well, on the other hand, the technology in cancer research, we've known for decades that cancer is caused by mutations in our own genes. And it was a bit of look under the lamppost and happenstance of natural accidents of nature that led to the discovery of the first genes that cause cancer. But the technology of DNA sequencing allowed us over the last 10 years or so to take a brute force approach and just sequence every gene in every cancer, and let's just see what's in the library and where the misspellings are. So maybe it's not so creative, but it's now an unbelievable source.
On the other hand, this wealth of information, which I'm really taking part in it, is providing you with so much information. And there's so many secrets which are hidden here, where sometimes you have no clue where to go. Moreover, there is a generation of young scientists which are educated to follow this as a successful trend because you can do it and it doesn't cost much to do it, and they stop thinking. There is a lot, most of science advance from hypothesis-driven research, and the balance between the two. So I'm supportive of both, don't misunderstand me, but I'm afraid that much of, and that may be what you were talking, Tony,
yeah.
The school of hypothesis-driven research is really shrinking. And we are training people who... I'll just give you another example. When we were young, we were doing a lot of experiments with radioactivity, and they're very useful experiments, and we know how to do them very, very carefully, and it's absolutely not dangerous. The young generation now does not want to touch radioactivity. Any radioactive experiment, whatsoever. And this is just because there's some kind of general phobia. So you have, development and progress comes with issues, and no one is going to stop and no one is going to disagree with what Charles said. This is fantastic development, but we have to balance it in the right way.
It's like you go back to Richard before, was holding up his cell phone. And on the one hand, that's created a society wanting immediate gratification, immediate access to information. On the other hand, without that technology, we use GPS to figure out where the hardest to reach are so we can get them life-saving medications.
Some would say that's a constructive use of technology because it doesn't diminish your ability to think outside the box.
You can use SMS texting as a farmer to find out weather forecasts, to find out information that helps you be more productive and sustain your family. So everything has a positive. Depends how you use it. It's up to us and how we use it.
That's the key point. And so the thing is that there's a tendency that once somebody has success with something or or apparent success with something, then people say everybody should be doing this. And this happened in the pharmaceutical industry about 15 or 20 years ago, where people came up with this idea of combinatorial chemistry, which was an incredible failure. Yes. But it was something that was really easy to sell to management, because you would get many more leads per dollar. Okay, and they said, well, what could be wrong about that? But then it turned out that wasn't what was limiting getting drugs. So the key is not to say technology is everything or technology is nothing. It's to use it intelligently. And when you do experiments, for example, to do them for a purpose, not randomly.
But let's take up that point with you, Leonard. I mean, using technology intelligently. Are we not doing that? Are we just simply using it for gratification, for silly purposes, or purposes which may seem silly to others but sensible to the user? How are we using that technology?
There's a whole spectrum of use. I mean, at one end, I like to say that computers are the worst enemy of critical thinking. And you heard that from some of my colleagues here earlier. Students will come to me with a result they got from a simulation. And I'll say, okay, now explain to me what's going on in the underlying physical system. And they look at me blankly, and I say, what if I double this parameter? What will happen? And they say, oh, I'll simulate that case. I say, no, you have no understanding what's going on. So that's an extreme case of overuse of technology as a crutch. On the other hand, technology is a great aid in solving some of the chemistry problems, some of the biology problems, some of the technology problems that we have today. So it's an as you said, intelligent use of technology. Don't depend upon it. Don't ignore it. Exploit it. Experimentation is the name of the game these days. But think about what you're doing. Look at the results, and please understand them, and then move on. Don't just flood me with data, and then don't tell me what it means.
And don't explain it. But I mean, many of you teach. So how do you detach your students from that to actually encourage them to actually use the technology in a sensible way? It's great that you've actually found a way of coming up with this model, but it's not really useful if you can't explain the underlying dynamics.
Yeah, I mean, it's challenging, be honest. There's some suggestion that there's been a rise in pedestrian accidents because people are walking in front of city buses. And we as professors are supposed to be sufficiently engaging that our students put down something that is so engaging that they would look at it and not look up to see if they're going to be run over by a city bus. I teach a class in mathematical modeling in the sciences, how to build the computer model of things. And I do exactly what you said. I tell them, you may not turn on the computer until you actually know the answer reasonably well.
How do they react to that, though? Because they've got their computers, and they're a generation that's grown up with Facebook and all the hybrids and all of these toys, and you know, hell or her, you're saying to them, you can't switch on the PC.
You're exactly right. And those that respond to your suggestions, you take on as PhD students. And the rest, you let them. Yeah. No, I'm serious. That's almost the way you select them. Yeah. But it's a declining skill and willingness. People are, the instant gratification is rearing its head in this case.
So technology has made us lazy.
All of us are saying the same thing.
You'd be pleased to hear economics is no different.
It seems that you've got it right. You're lucky. You can get it right in your work. You've got intelligent use there.
Well, we have to. But I think, in our work, we rely on the science of everybody in this gathering, and we're about the delivery of that science. So,
just finally, again, sort of sage thought to end on for all of you. We've talked about technology and creativity, that if it's used badly, it is a challenge in itself. But what are the other main challenges that we face that perhaps we need to prioritise them? Can you prioritise them, or are they simply too big?
I think there's a regression in education. I think the schools in many places are not good enough, and the people are getting the true sciences only when they come to college or even later. And I touched the problem of religious versus science. I think we have a problem in that.
Well, also, particularly in the U.S., I don't know about in other places, but there's this this need to test, and so in the high schools they're teaching for the testing because then they get evaluated on those scores, and so people never learn how to think. They're just given massive amounts of information.
Getting to the science side, though, there is another change that I see is taking place, certainly in the engineering world, and that is our young kids are not getting their hands dirty and doing things, making stuff. And it's all in the computer or all in somewhere out on the web, instead of taking apart a toy or doing a chemistry experiment or building a small robot or even a vehicle. However, there is a move these days with the 3D printers and with these things like the small computers you can buy, the Raspberry Pi is an example, where kids are finally getting back to getting their hands dirty. It used to be, as a kid in New York, I could go out in the street and find some piece of junk in the street and go play with it and build it and take it apart and put it back together again. I don't see that happening today. It's all on his phone that they're playing with. And
so blame technology.
Yeah. Now, he can take the back off of his phone and fix the battery, but most of us can't even do that. And in addition to the finest example, but across physics, the middle part and the latter part of the 20th century, the discoveries were made by people who took apart radios. And you go back and read one biography or autobiography after another, and it's the same story. The discoveries were made by people who took apart radios, and I can't take the back off of mine.
So science and technology has become magic for most people, yes. Right? It is just, and maybe that's why the beliefs are so strange, because to them a cell phone is a magical device. Yes. They have no idea how it works. I think the other thing that is missing, though, is that science and technology are only part of what it means to be a human. And I think the simple word wisdom is a word that we haven't said very much today. But I think we have to have wisdom to lead our lives in the right way, to think about the future, think about other people, think about equality among people, think about ethics. To me, these are issues that are as important and maybe more important for the future.
Although you touched on the concept of wisdom when you talked about something not going right, you have to start again because that's part of your learning curve.
Sure.
Sure. I'm afraid we have to leave it there, but that does conclude this debate with the 2015 winners of the BBVA Foundation Frontiers of Knowledge Awards. I'd like to extend my congratulations to all of you on your remarkable achievements. May you continue to both inspire and create change. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.